Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to History Heights. I'm Gail Macinda. Not long ago, I was reminded of the book Roughing It by Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, if you prefer, and a section in it that made me laugh. Well, because it was funny, as Mark Twain could be. But it also described an absurd event because, well, that's how Mark Twain wrote. Ever the curious student of history, I decided to look into it, and lo and behold, found it to be true, or at least mostly true. Here's a tiny bit of backstory to help set the scene. The United States Sanitary Commission was founded in 1861 during the Civil War. Although it was organized by federal legislation, it was a private relief organization which provided support to the sick and wounded soldiers of the United States Army. Their goals were ambitious. They provided clothing, medical supplies to the soldiers, staffed field hospitals, established soldiers' homes, and so much more. All of these efforts required a great deal of financial support, so fundraisers were very common. And our story today is about one of those fundraisers. It begins with Reuel Gridley. Just like Clemens, Gridley was from Hannibal, Missouri, and Clemens claimed that Gridley was one of his schoolmates. While still a teenager, Gridley left Hannibal to seek adventure and his fortune. After serving in the United States military during the Mexican-American War, like so many others, he headed to California during the gold rush, although he was a bit late to the party. He tried his hand at mining and tried other vocational pursuits too, and eventually ended in Austin, Nevada. In 1863, Gridley, with his wife Susan, built a general store there, which became successful in large part to Gridley's outgoing and friendly ways. Nevada became a state during the Civil War and was aligned with the Union cause. In 1864, the same year that Nevada became a state, the citizens of Austin were electing their first mayor. Twain states that Gridley was a candidate, but it seems that Gridley simply supported the Confederate Democratic candidate. Regardless, Gridley made a friendly wager with Dr. Henry Herrick, who was his friend and also a supporter of the pro Union Republican candidate. They agreed that if the Democrat lost, Gridley would carry a 50-pound sack of flour on a march a little over a mile long. His journey would be accompanied by music, most accounts say by a band, others say to his own whistling, to the tune of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which became the Union anthem during the Civil War. But if the Republican lost, then Herrick would have to make that journey carrying the 50-pound sack of flour while marching to, or whistling, Dixie. The Republican candidate, Charles Holbrook, won the election, and therefore the honor of selecting the sack of flour from Gridley's store, which Gridley was now to carry. The good natured Gridley fulfilled his end of the bet with humor and style. He decorated that sack of flour with red, white, and blue ribbons, hoisted it on his shoulder, and away he went. His son marched along with him while carrying an American flag. The brass band played, and the townsfolk followed in an exuberant procession. He finished the march, gave the sack of flour to Herrick, and everyone, including the sack of flour, went to the Grimes and Gibson saloon to celebrate. But Herrick didn't need the flour, so he asked what should be done with it. We'll pick up the story now using the words of Mark Twain. Sell it to the highest bidder for the benefit of the sanitary fund. The suggestion was greeted with a round of applause, and Gridley mounted a dry goods box and assumed the role of auctioneer. The bids went higher and higher as the sympathies of the pioneers awoke and expanded, till at last the sack was knocked down to a millman at $250 and his check taken. He was asked where he would have the flour delivered, and he said, "Nowhere, sell it again." The crowd cheered excitedly, and everyone was caught up in the moment. Gridley continued to auction off his sack of flour over and over again for the rest of the day. According to Twain, when the crowd finally left, Gridley has sold that sack of flour to 300 different people and taken in $8,000 in gold. And the flour sack was still in his possession. A telegram of the news of this fundraising was sent to nearby towns, and the reply came back, "Fetch along your flour sack." So Gridley took the flour sack and headed to the town of Virginia City. It should be noted that at this time, the newspaper editor in Virginia City was none other than Samuel Clemens. This time, people gathered at the Opera House, but Gridley showed up sooner than expected, and not everyone who wanted to be there had yet arrived. Still, the auction began, and one miner after another bid outrageous sums of money on that sack of flour, all to benefit the Union cause. And every time, the flour was donated back to be bid on again. Gridley himself paid $300 for that flour that he already owned. And so while another large sum of money was raised, city leaders were disappointed that they did not raise as much as did the neighboring town of Austin. So they worked through the night to arrange another attempt at fundraising, this time working with other nearby communities, all of which were eager to share their recent earnings from the booming silver mining endeavors. At 11 o'clock the next morning, on a very hot and dusty day, there was a parade of carriages, with Gridley and the flour sack in the first decorated carriage, followed by marching bands and flags which proceeded through Virginia City. But then continued down the road and on to the nearby town called Gold Hill, which left the citizens of Virginia City very confused. When the procession arrived in Gold Hill, the main street was already crowded with cheering people. Gridley stood up and asked who would make the first bid. A man shouted out, "The Yellow Jacket Silver Mining Company offers $1,000, coin." Wild cheers went up from the crowd. The auction continued, and when completed, in spite of the citizens of Virginia City sending telegrams pleading with Gridley to return, the parade moved on to the towns of Silver City and then Dayton, where the exuberant bidding continued amidst the cheers of everyone in attendance. All the while, the details of these auctions were being sent back by telegram to Virginia City, so everyone there knew exactly what was going on. At 8:30 that evening, the procession finally returned to Virginia City, where the citizens were eagerly waiting. Here's how Twain described it. Torches were glaring, flags flying, bands playing, cheer on cheer cleaving the air. The auction began, every bid greeted with bursts of applause. And at the end of 2.5 hours, a population of 15,000 souls had paid in coin for a 50-pound sack of flour, a sum equal to $40,000 in greenbacks. Twain remarked that the total would have been much greater if everyone who wanted to be there to bid could have found a place to stand, but the streets were already too full of people. If you are enjoying our story, please take a moment to hit those like and subscribe buttons. And in the comments below, I'd love to hear what you think of Gridley's fundraising idea. But just like our story, Gridley wasn't done yet. Over the next few months, Gridley traveled another 15,000 miles, at his own expense, it should be noted, to more towns in Nevada and on to California, and eventually he headed east, where he sold and resold his sack of flour, raising funds all along the way. In January of 1865, Harper's Weekly published a story about Gridley's fundraising. After a description of his endeavors so far, it stated, "No ladies' album in Nevada or California is considered complete without a photograph of Gridley and his sack of flour." Gridley's last stop was in St. Louis, Missouri, where a large Sanitary Commission fair was being held. He sold the flour one last time, and then the flour was used to bake small cakes. Each cake sold for $1 each, all, of course, to benefit the United States Sanitary Commission. By the end of his journey, it is estimated that Gridley raised $275,000. That's well over $5 million in today's value, all with his one sack of flour. He was a hero and credited with keeping the Sanitary Commission financially going and was called one of the greatest unarmed heroes of the war. However, by then the silver boom had gone bust and his business suffered. He had spent all of his personal wealth on his charitable work and he was broke. In addition to that, his health was failing. The Gridley family decided to move to Stockton, California, where Gridley's sister lived. He was so ill that he was taken there in a bed placed in the back of a wagon. He tried to return to business again, but died at the age of 41 on November 24th, 1870, leaving behind a wife and their 4 children. Gridley was buried in Stockton, California, and his grave was marked with just a simple cross. 16 years after his death, a local chapter of the Grand Army of the Republic, a Union veterans organization, began fundraising for what they considered to be a proper monument to honor Gridley and his dedication to them. In 1887, they erected and dedicated a tall monument of Gridley and his sack of flour. The monument reads, "The Soldier's Friend." In 1965, the Gridley Monument was designated as a California State Historical Landmark. The Gridley, Hobart, and Jacobs General Store building in Austin is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And the famous and now empty flour sack is in the collection of the Nevada Historical Society, which operates a museum at the University of Nevada in Reno. It is said that Gridley's journey changed the hearts and minds of many people, with Gridley himself becoming a strong Unionist. I especially like how the book, A History of the State of Nevada, sums it up. Men realized that they could feel differently about the war and still be friends. I think this is an important lesson for us today, too. We can learn from the past, but we don't live there. Go be awesome today. Make your own history. Stick around for another great story.